Paradise Killer. This was a game I remember when it first launched on the Switch. I remember taking a look at the store page and saying, "Oh, this looks awesome." And then I saw the price, and I'm poor, so I couldn't afford it, and I was very sad about it. But fast forward to my Game of the Year list, and longtime friend of the show, Sly Boots, mentioned that this was his Game of the Year. And as he described it, I believe his exact words were, "Vaporwave meets Miami Vice meets Cosmic Horror meets JoJo." And I don't know about you, I am about all of that. That sounds awesome to me. And as someone who does like a good whodunit murder mystery, something like this does appeal to me. It was bright and it was colorful from the looks of it. But what was most important to me, and this might seem like such a small finicky thing to people, but to me it was probably the biggest thing of all, is this was an investigative game that wasn't a visual novel. Because if I can pull back the curtain a little bit and give you a better understanding of who I am, I hate visual novels with a passion. I find them so incredibly boring. I would, and have in the past, gotten more out of reading the entire transcript of a Phoenix Wright game rather than actually playing them. Because to me, visual novels end up being reading, but with extra steps, and a threat of punishment if you do something wrong or you don't point out the right thing or answer the exact right way at the end of chapter quiz. And that crap is exactly why I hated my mother's Harry Potter book club that she made me go to. Well, that and I never liked Harry Potter, but my point is, I don't like visual novels, but I love the idea of an investigative type of thing. So something like this, to me, is awesome, and it sets an amazing tone. This game is really something special, and if you like sort of murder mystery whodunit type things, or just interesting games, I'm urging you, before I even get into this game, you need to play this game because it's awesome. The story to Paradise Killer is deep and interesting and has a lot of great world building. In a world parallel to our own, 24 islands have been sequentially created and destroyed, run by a society of basically immortals, all while kidnapping humans to run the whole thing, forcing them into slavery, and then sacrificing them to old gods of the stars in order to give them back power. And every one of these islands in sequence, without fail, has been corrupted by demons. When you worship cosmic horror gods, you tend to attract some bad eggs too. And then they have to discard the islands to get away from the whole corruption. But every single time they build a new island, it gets closer and closer to a perfect utopian paradise. So it's actually net pretty much perfect, aside from the corruption and you know, the mass ritualistic murder of humans to, you know, appease old gods that are, you know, causing the demons to come. But, you know, other than that, it's great. Well, just as soon as everyone's ready to move on to Island 25, the perfect 25, mind you, they finally did it. The council, the entire group of people who run the show, have been murdered. Now bear in mind, this isn't some normal murder. First of all, they're immortals, but second of all, they're immortals that exist in a space that only they themselves can access, behind 3 layers of security that defy godhood and even Euclidean space, and yet someone managed to do it. You are Lady Lovedeyes, investigation freak, an absolute style queen. You cannot tell me that that red jacket on black shirt with gold trim isn't sexy, because it's absolutely sexy. If I had any inkling I could actually pull something like that off, I would love an outfit like that. Seriously. Awesome shirt jacket combo. Very, very nice. She has been brought out of exile after 3 million days. And if you do the math, that's actually quite a long time. In order to solve the crime to end all crimes and discover who is the Paradise Killer. This game has some of the most amazing world building ever, because that whole thing I used to set up this, you know, talking about how humanity's been kind of kidnapped, forced into slavery, and then are just blood sacrifices. Yeah, that's kind of all window dressing in the background of this game. It's all world building. But this game does it incredibly well, to the point where it almost overtakes sort of the main plot of the game at times. You'll wander the streets of this island and you will notice just how bizarrely surreal it feels. This is a place where people lived, where you can frequently find numerous collectible relics of past lives that are dotted about the map. And yet, as bright and as colorful and as beautiful and animated as this island is, it is incredibly empty. It is a dead world. Most of the immortals have now moved on to Island 25. The only ones who are left are the people who potentially caused the murder. All the humans have been blood sacrificed to the old gods. You are in a very surreal, dead world, and it clashes beautifully with just how alive it looks. You know, you stand in places and you can see the sky, you know, going through day and night cycles, stars passing by, clouds passing by, little koi fish kites flapping in the wind, which was very, very beautiful. Looking at anything in this game is beautiful, but it feels like a place that was absolutely lived in by tons and tons and tons of people. This huge map, and yet it's empty. It's almost kind of like if you were to play like an MMORPG, but you were the only one playing it. You're in this huge environment, but you're basically alone, and it's surreal and otherworldly and just unsettling. I kind of got like a Deadly Premonition vibe while playing this just from the world building because, you know, it's a safe environment. There's no combat, there's no way to get hurt, and yet I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder feeling like this entire environment is just oppressive and creepy, and not just for like the whole background thing about this organization kidnapping humans en masse just to sacrifice them after they turn themselves into slaves, you know? This entire world is freaking terrifying, and it's so beautiful in how it does it. But who could the Paradise Killer be? Well, it could be Love Die's old friends, Sam and Lydia Daybreak, ex-assassins who have now become the bus and a bartender, and one is a Crimson Skellington and is amazing. Perhaps it was Dr. Doomjazz, a cybernetically enhanced doctor with a bit of a history with love dives. Maybe it was Crimson Acid, ex-military hero turned idol who's a little unsatisfied with her life. Could it be Yuri Knight, the guy you desperately want to punch in his stupid Yuri Knight face over and over and over? Or maybe, just maybe, it was Henry Division, the human guy, who was possessed by a demon 10 years ago and locked up, who apparently escaped and everyone's saying did it. That's too easy, isn't it? Well, it's up to Lady Love Dies to solve this case, the crime to end all crimes, and separate the facts from the truth. Because when love dies, all that remains are the facts. Finding the Paradise Killer. Well, that's not the only case in this game. And depending on your investigative skills, you might find half a dozen more, on top of side quests that you can complete. Tons of stuff to find. And ultimately, gathering facts and clues and information, trying to piece this whole story together. And the interesting thing of all is, there isn't necessarily one right answer to all of this. One of the earliest cases you get is to find one of the immortals, KHX. He hasn't been seen in a while, and if you follow the clues and gather all the information, well, it could point to one of two people having been involved with some foul play. And it's up to you to figure out who actually did it. And this one I was struggling with because one person has a lot more evidence against them, but it feels a lot more circumstantial. Whereas the other one feels a little bit more convenient, but it feels a little bit more solid and concrete. The way they write each of the individual cases, and even the fact that you don't necessarily have to take part in any of them if you don't even see them, is, you know, just amazing. The world building, the cases, and the overall narrative of this game is amazing. The characters are brilliant. They're all incredibly unique and unhinged with their own interesting personalities and amazing designs. This world and its story are just top notch. Now, as I've said, one of the biggest things to me for this investigative game that stood out to me and was gameplay-wise why I was so excited about this game was the fact that it wasn't a visual novel. That it was a game where you exist in three-dimensional physical space and you wander around and look at stuff. And I know that sounds petty, but it really does change how you investigate and actually makes it more fun, at least in my opinion, because if you take a look at a static screen, visual novel style investigative game, you're pretty much forced to stare at a screen and click everything until the game says, okay, you've clicked everything, move on. Even if you don't necessarily know why you were clicking on things or you didn't notice something individually. The developers put all these things in here that are tied to the story. You need to examine every single one of them, even if you can't perceive it or don't understand why, and you won't be allowed to continue until you do. But by moving the game into a three-dimensional space, it makes it a lot more immersive and actually makes it your investigation. It's not a matter of the developers simply saying, here are all the hints, and until you click on every single one of them, you can't move on. Here, if there's hidden evidence or clues as to what happened that exist in this physical space, you have to actually physically find them. If they are behind a flower pot, you have to look behind a flower pot. And you have to maneuver in three-dimensional space in order to see some things. And because this game takes place in such a bizarre, surrealist landscape, sometimes you have to move out of your way and have to do some parkour and jumping, and look in places you wouldn't necessarily consider. All of which were things that, if they were in a static screen visual novel style investigative game, would just be areas forced upon you. There wouldn't actually be any active thought or three-dimensional thinking as to what happened, why this happened, and how this happened. It would just be, you've got a new screen put in front of your face, click all the things until you move on, and hopefully you understand. You have to actively take part in the investigation and understand the events that transpired. You have to develop your own hypothesis and explore based on that. It's not a matter of simply everything being sprawled out in front of you. No, you have to go looking for the evidence and the clues and the information, and that makes all the world of difference, because suddenly it's your investigation, not just an investigation that was presented to you. No, here you're forced to understand and then seek things out in order to connect those clues. And again, it might seem like such a small thing, but from a gameplay perspective, it means so much to me because it makes it so much more immersive and actually puts me in the role of the investigation freak and trying to solve this mystery and trying to understand what happened, where, why, and how, you know? Like I said, it might seem like such a small thing initially, but for me, it makes a world of difference. It makes it all the more interesting. I also really appreciate that in the open world that you move around in, basic puzzle solution and problem solving sort of has a Deus Ex style as the crow flies approach. I remember there was like this one door I wanted to get to, but it was behind a locked gate that was locked from the inside. But I noticed that there was like a chair next to the fence, and if you jumped onto like the back of the chair, you could kind of just jump on top of the fence and then jump through and open the gate. I'm not sure if that's how you were supposed to solve that problem, but it felt sort of very Deus Ex in the fact that it wasn't necessarily planned, but if you can kind of find out how to like maneuver around the environment, you can solve these problems rather simply, just with a little bit of lateral thinking. And if you can't do that, well, there's plenty of upgrades that give you like double jumps, air dashes, as well as a detective sense to see all sorts of crazy stuff through walls and stuff, which helps for the puzzle solving as well. But I do appreciate that they allow these sort of creative solutions, as opposed to just putting like giant invisible walls up until you get like a double jump to jump over the fence or something, you know? It's appreciated to see that my out-of-the-box thinking was treated as a very viable solution to all of this. And similar to the game existing in a 3D space, it means that me as a person is more invested in how this works, because suddenly I'm the one coming up with the solutions, and they work, even if they weren't necessarily intended. Again, everything about this game, just being in a 3D space that lets you maneuver how you want, creates a sense of immersion and agency as the character of Lady Love Dies. It's not so much that you're controlling a character that exists in this environment and has to solve these tasks, so much as it's you in this environment trying to figure out how to solve these problems, and I am all for that. That is fantastic. Now that said, the huge 3D environment does feel a little bit empty, and while that works great for the bizarrely creepy, beautiful atmosphere this game goes for, from an actual like 3D movement and gameplay perspective, it's a little bit bland because it feels bigger than it needs to be. A lot of this area is basically just used for going from point A to point B, and there's quick travel for that, although you have to pay for it. And the only thing that really occupies this space is collectibles that for the most part don't really matter, aside from world building or giving you currency to quick travel. I think they could have probably better outfitted the environment with more clues and stuff, but you also have to understand that, you know, in a story like this, not every environment is going to be used and is directly tied to the events of the game. I get that, but it does feel a little bit like there's a lot of just random small collectibles or collecting random icons so that you get a little bit of currency for a really pointless collecting puzzle or something, you know? That said, there are some very minor puzzles that actually do tie into the environments and actually do tie into the actual story of the game, and when those are introduced and you actually get like a clue as to what happened, it feels so satisfying. I just wish there was like more of that, you know? There's also slight, like, I don't want to say life sim dating elements to this game, but you can hang out with each and every one of the suspects and you can build up your trust with them. And as that happens, they can give you more information or clues or something to ask a different character. And this can ultimately give you a better understanding of what each character was doing, where, why, and with who. You can corroborate their alibis and figure out, well, this person said you weren't there, or there was a time frame where something doesn't match up. So, you know, by building up your relationships with each person, you can better figure out what happened to them and everyone else. They really did have a great sort of very small system here. Like, it's not super big. You basically hang out with each character like 3 or 4 times over the course of the entire game, and the fact that you can get more information out of these characters, like they're not telling you 100% of everything, and getting close to them will get them to reveal more and more, feels very, very realistic and feels like these are real people you're building up a rapport with, and I really appreciate that. The interesting thing is the game kind of ends when you want it to end as well. You just have to approach the judge and say you're ready for a trial, and then you state your truth. And I want to focus on that, your truth. It's a matter of you trying to piece together what happened or what you think happened, and then provide you're confident enough in this statement that you back it up with the evidence you've found that supports your claims. It's not necessarily that there's one correct answer, although if you find every bit of information, you can kind of see exactly what actually happened, but it's more about finding what you believe is the truth and then supporting that claim, which is very, very interesting. It does end up feeling kind of like you're ultimately making the accusations, but also trying to support them, and in a very limited sense, sort of writing the entire story of the events that happened yourself. And that's really interesting. Genuinely, I think it's probably one of the more really interesting gameplay hooks this game has, is the fact that you're kind of ultimately creating the events that happened just by your piecing together of evidence and making the claims. And that's really, really genuinely cool. The conclusion you've come to is in fact the truth, whatever that truth may be. That's why the game constantly says, state your truth, because it's ultimately the truth you have come to the conclusion of that will be the accepted truth, provided you can back it up. And I think that is awesome. Overall, the world is great. The 3D exploration is fantastic. Interacting with characters is really, really interesting. Collecting relics of the past, making blood sacrifices yourself to find bits of lore and figuring out what the old gods really are on about. Finding clues, showing those clues to other suspects to better get them to crack under pressure to understand what they really did in certain situations and stuff. It's all very fascinating, and all builds up to an excellent trial where you have to build your case. You have to explain exactly what happened, and you have to explain your truth based on what you found, and ultimately become the executioner of this world. Every single step of this game is all building towards that one moment, and it executes it fantastically. Gameplay-wise, I think Paradise Killer is a truly special game, and it's probably the best whodunit mystery I've gotten to actually play in the form of a game anyway. It's very complex. There's more than one case, provided you're willing to look out for them, and they all weave a very complex tapestry of character interaction in a very creepy, dark world that is just really, really beautiful. The overall presentation to Paradise Killer is outstanding. It's got a great vaporwave aesthetic. Everything's bright and colorful, and like I said, it kind of has sort of a surrealist landscape that makes me think of like an early MMO that's been abandoned by everyone. Almost sort of like something out of Reboot. It's weird and alien, and you can kind of recognize what stuff is, but at the same time, everything just feels off. It has like this just bright, colorful, but at the same time, very, very creepy, ominous sort of atmosphere about it. One other thing, presentation-wise, I really liked is the entire island is falling apart at the seams. It is being held together with string, chewing gum, and hope, and a lot of ritualistically sacrificed blood. And because it's at its, end times, the whole thing visually and audibly is glitching. If you look at stuff in the sky, you'll see birds flying backwards. In fact, the game will even point this out. And when you listen to the really incredibly awesome, upbeat, nicely paced music, every now and then it'll like just glitch out and turn to this really, really somber, slow-paced song that just feels really, really unbelievably creepy. And then it pops back and glitches into the proper, upbeat, regular music again. It's very, very strange, but awesome. And it's cool that they worked in the narrative into the actual mechanics of the game. That's very, very cool, and it affects the presentation, which is great. This game does the visuals very, very well. The characters are beautiful, like I said, Lady Love Dies, and her amazing outfit. Sam Daybreak, a blood red skeleton. How can you not love that? I love the judge's design. All the characters just feel incredibly off-kilter and insanely designed, and I love it. Like, seriously, there was a lot of detail poured into these characters, and just to make them as unique and interesting and have their own tone and flair, and it's just beautiful. Audio-wise, this game is pretty stellar, although it does have one or two small bumps in my opinion. The soundtrack itself is incredibly easy listening, lots of synth. If you can buy the version of this game that comes with the soundtrack, I'm begging you, do it. And they actually tie the soundtrack into the mechanics because this is basically not a real physical space. At least in the terms that we understand, it's more like a sort of alternate, I don't know, almost sort of simulation world that's sort of been brought to physicality. Instead, all the music is pumped through the world through speakers. And if you find these speakers, you can find the mixtape that's tied to them, take it out and plug it into your computer and start listening to the soundtrack there. But the closer you get to these speakers, the louder the music gets, the further away, the quieter. Unless, of course, you start plugging in the music to be processed through your computer, then it'll just follow you wherever. But the fact that the audio levels change depending on your relative proximity to these speakers is really, really cool and reminds me a lot of Space Station Silicon Valley. And any game that reminds me of that gets a thumbs up from me. The voice acting in this game is also terrific, but here's where things get a little bit iffy. While I do like the voice acting a lot, I feel like the direction might be a little bit off because some of the lines just don't feel like they have quite the right inflection on them. The other big issue with the voice acting is one character in particular, Witness to the End. This guy wears a big metal mask, so they gave his voice a bit of a sort of echo filter and sort of a metallicness to it. But the thing is, they turn this filter up really, really loudly. To the point where it's so harsh, it's almost hard to hear what he's saying. And as someone who has a bit of an audio sensitivity myself, it actually hurt my ears a little bit listening to this guy. If they just toned down that filter a little bit, I think this character would be a lot better just in terms of how he sounds. But the voice acting in general is great. And the only real other issue I have with it is honestly more of a budgetary thing, I'm sure, but I just kind of wish this game was fully voice acted because the voice actors are all excellent. They're all doing a great job, and you know, I just wish all these lines were voiced. But instead, we kind of have to live with each character having about half a dozen to a dozen different lines, which is a bit disappointing given the quality that we are given from the actual talent. Overall, the presentation to Paradise Killer is very, very unique, very, very cool, and I think that would sell this game alone. Like, seriously, looking at this game from screenshots when I saw it go on sale on the Switch the first time I ever saw it, I wanted to play it just based on the looks and soundtrack alone. The characters looked amazing, and everything about this game's presentation sold me on it already. And then it just turned out it was a really solid game too, which is great. Now, if you want a copy of Paradise Killer on Steam, you can get it for $22.79, and for more or less $25. I'd say this game is absolutely worth it. Now, it's worth saying, it's not super long. Like, if you're looking for a very lengthy game, you might be disappointed in this game, because I went through and collected basically everything, played as long as I could, and I clocked in at about 15 hours. That said, that is some of the most quality gameplay experience I've received this year. And I have to give a huge shout out and thank you to longtime friend of the show, Sly Boots, for hooking me up with this. It was his game of the year last year, and I gotta say, I totally get it. I have wanted to play this game for a very, very long time. I was super excited when he sent this to me along with a bunch of other Steam codes, and this was the first thing I wanted to play out of it, and it did not disappoint. Paradise Killer is one of the coolest games I've played this year. I mean, honestly, this and Elden Ring are kind of tied for my game of the year so far. It's very, very cool, and if anything you've seen or heard about this game that I've said today has interested you, I'm urging you to play this game because it is just that damn cool. You can also get it on Switch, which I've actually just bought because I love this game this much and I want the developers to have more money so we can get another one. And I want to say it's on Game Pass as well, or it's going to be soon. I read something about it being related to Game Pass, so you know, if you have any way of playing this game, play it, because it is a damn good investigation. It's a great story in a great world with some amazing world building, brilliant characters, and a really genuinely interesting mystery, all set in a very cool world with an amazing aesthetic. Paradise Killer really is something special, and I really hope we get a sequel to this, or something in the same vein, because this is just something so amazing. And the only thing that really would hurt my feelings about this game getting a sequel is that it would make this kind of less special, because there'd be another one. But that would be great, because there'd be another one. Seriously, Paradise Killer, it's amazing. It's one of the best games I've played this year, and if anything about this looks interesting to you, grab it, because it truly is something beautiful.
precise killer.